The colony ship Horizon's Edge moved slowly through the darkness of space. It was the year 2187, and 3,000 human souls were traveling to a new world. They had left Earth 6 months ago, hoping to build a new home in the Kepler 442 system. Captain Daniel Reyes stood on the bridge and watched the stars through the main window. He was a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes. He had spent 30 years in space, but this mission was different. This time, he was not exploring. He was leading humanity's first real attempt to live among the stars. Lieutenant Commander Lauren Mitchell sat at her station, checking the ship's systems. She was young, only 32, but she had earned her position through hard work and dedication. The journey had been peaceful so far. Too peaceful, she sometimes thought. Space was big and empty, and they had not seen anything unusual since leaving the solar system. That changed in an instant. The sensors screamed with warnings. Lauren jumped from her seat and stared at her screen. Dozens of contacts were appearing all around them. Ships. Massive ships, bigger than anything humans had ever built. They were black and smooth, shaped like daggers cutting through the void. Captain Reyes felt his heart go cold. He had always believed that humanity was alone in the universe. He had been wrong. The alien ships surrounded the Horizon's Edge within minutes. There was no escape. The colony ship was slow and unarmed. It had been built for peace, not war. A message came through the communication system. The voice was deep and harsh, speaking in a language that the ship's computer somehow translated. The speaker called himself High Commander Zethkar of the Varadi Dominion. He said that humans were now property of the Dominion. They would surrender immediately, or they would be destroyed. Captain Reyes tried to speak calmly. He introduced himself and said that humans came in peace. He talked about cooperation and friendship between their species. He said that there was no need for violence. Zethkar laughed. It was a terrible sound, like metal scraping against metal. He said that the Varadi had conquered 17 species across 40 star systems. No one had ever resisted them successfully. Humans were weak and primitive. They would serve the Dominion as workers, or they would die. There was no other choice. Lauren watched her captain's face. She saw the struggle in his eyes. 3,000 people depended on him. Families, children, scientists, and workers who had dreamed of a new life. How could he condemn them to slavery? How could he watch them die? Captain Reyes made his choice. He stood straight and looked at the screen showing Zethkar's face. The alien was tall and thin, with gray skin and 4 eyes that showed no emotion. Reyes told him that humans would not surrender. They would not become slaves. If the Varadi wanted a fight, they would get one. Zethkar was amused. He had expected this response. Prey always struggled before accepting their fate. He gave the order to fire. The first blast hit the Horizon's Edge like a hammer from God. The ship shook violently, and Lauren was thrown to the floor. Alarms filled the air with screaming sounds. Fires broke out in multiple sections. The second blast tore through the cargo hold, killing hundreds of colonists in seconds. Captain Reyes shouted orders through the chaos. He told everyone to get to the escape pods. The ship could not survive this attack, but maybe some of them could escape. Dr. Nathan Cole was in the science lab when the attack started. He was a xenobiologist, a scientist who studied alien life. He had spent his career hoping to find evidence of other intelligent species. Now he had found them, and they were trying to kill him. The ship rocked again as another blast struck. Nathan grabbed his data chip and stuffed it into his pocket. He had been recording everything since the alien ships appeared. The scans of their technology, their biology, their weapons. If he survived, this information could save humanity. He ran through the corridors, pushing past screaming people and stepping over bodies. Smoke filled his lungs and made his eyes water. He found an escape pod with a few empty seats and threw himself inside. A young woman named Grace was already there, clutching her 2 children. An engineer named Paul was trying to close the door. The pod launched just as another section of the horizon's edge exploded. Through the small window, Nathan watched the colony ship break apart. Flames and debris spread across the darkness of space. 3,000 people had been aboard. How many had escaped? He did not know. The variety ships did not chase the escape pods. High Commander Zethkar watched them flee toward a nearby moon with cold satisfaction. He ordered his fleet to let them go. These survivors would spread the story of what happened here. They would tell Earth about the power of the Variety Dominion. Fear was a useful weapon. The escape pod crashed hard on the frozen surface of Kepler 442b. Nathan hit his head and blacked out for a moment. When he woke up, Grace was crying and her children were screaming. Paul was checking the pod systems with shaking hands. They were alive. Somehow, they were alive. Nathan pulled out his data chip and looked at it. This small piece of technology held everything he had recorded about the Variety. Their ships, their weapons, their tactics. It was not much, but it was something. Over the next few days, other survivors found their way to Nathan's group. 47 people had escaped the destruction of the horizon's edge. 47 out of 3,000. They built shelters from the wreckage and tried to survive on the hostile moon. Nathan worked to send a message to Earth. The pod's communication system was damaged, but he managed to transmit a weak signal carrying all his data about the Variety. He did not know if anyone would receive it. He did not know if it mattered, but he had to try. Back on his flagship, Zethkar reviewed the battle reports with satisfaction. The human ship had been destroyed with minimal effort. Their weapons had been useless against Variety shields. Their hull had crumbled like paper under Variety guns. These creatures were nothing special. They would be easy to conquer. He sent a message to the Council of Overlords on the Variety homeworld. He told them about the new species called humans. He said they were primitive but numerous, good for labor and nothing else. The Dominion would add Earth to its territory within a few years. The Council approved his assessment. They had conquered many species before. Humans would be no different. They were wrong. They had made the worst mistake in the history of their empire. They had attacked humanity and let survivors escape. They had given humans a warning and a reason to fight. On the frozen moon, Nathan Cole looked up at the stars and made a silent promise. The Variety had killed thousands of innocent people. They had laughed while doing it. Someday, somehow, humanity would make them pay. The war had not started yet, but it was coming. 3 years had passed since the destruction of the horizon's edge. The message from Dr. Nathan Cole had reached Earth, and it had changed everything. The governments of the world had watched the recordings in horror. They had seen the massive alien ships. They had heard the cold voice of High Commander Zethkar. They had understood the terrible truth. Humanity was not alone in the universe, and the universe was not friendly. For the first time in history, the nations of Earth stopped fighting each other. Old enemies became allies. Countries that had argued for decades suddenly found common ground. The threat from the stars was bigger than any conflict on Earth. If humanity did not unite, humanity would die. The United Earth Defense Coalition was formed within 6 months. Every nation contributed resources, scientists, and soldiers. Factories that had built cars and phones now built weapons and ships. Universities that had studied medicine and art now studied alien technology. The entire planet worked together with a single goal: survival. Admiral Marcus Webb was chosen to lead the military forces. He was 60 years old, with a scarred face and hard eyes. He had fought in the Mars Rebellion 20 years ago, when colonists on the Red Planet had demanded independence. He knew war. He knew sacrifice. He knew that the coming fight would be worse than anything humanity had ever faced. His first decision was to create the Prometheus Initiative. It was a secret program hidden in underground facilities beneath the Rocky Mountains. The best scientists and engineers in the world were brought there to study the data that Nathan Cole had sent. Their mission was simple, but nearly impossible. They had to understand Varadi technology and find ways to copy it. Dr. Megan Torres led the scientific team. She was a physicist, brilliant and driven. Her younger brother, Kevin, had been a colonist aboard the Horizon's Edge. He had died in the attack. Megan worked 18 hours a day, fueled by grief and anger. She would not rest until she had given humanity the weapons it needed. The work was incredibly difficult. The Varadi had been building starships for thousands of years. Their technology was far beyond anything humans had ever created. But humans were clever. They were creative. They found ways to adapt and improvise. Chief Technician Ryan Kowalski led the engineering teams. He was a practical man who believed that any problem could be solved with enough effort. His people took apart every piece of data from the alien ships and figured out how to rebuild it with human materials. They could not match Varadi quality, but they could come close. Close might be enough that the first human warship based on alien technology was completed in 18 months. They called it the Phoenix because humanity was rising from the ashes of defeat. It was smaller than Varadi ships, but faster and more maneuverable. Its weapons were weaker, but its shields were just as strong. Most importantly, it worked. Commander Samantha Blake was chosen to lead the first squadron of fighters. These small ships were called Valkyries, named after the warriors of ancient legend. Samantha was 35 years old, with short black hair and a calm voice that never showed fear. She had been a test pilot before the war, flying experimental aircraft that other pilots refused to touch. Now she flew ships that used alien engines. Her pilots trained constantly. They practiced combat maneuvers in simulators built from salvaged data. They studied Varadi tactics and looked for weaknesses. They pushed themselves until their bodies could not take anymore, and then they pushed harder. Meanwhile, deep space probes were sent to watch the edges of the solar system. Lieutenant Kyle Dawson commanded the Signals Intelligence Unit. He was young, only 26, but he had a gift for finding patterns where others saw only noise. His team monitored every transmission from outside the solar system, searching for signs of the enemy. What Kyle discovered gave humanity hope. The Varadi were predictable. They had been conquering other species for so long that they had forgotten how to adapt. Their fleets moved in patterns that never changed. Their tactics were the same ones they had used for centuries. They were powerful, but they were slow. Admiral Webb studied Kyle's reports carefully. The Varadi expected to find a frightened civilization waiting to surrender. They expected humans to beg for mercy. They had no idea that humans were preparing to fight. The Admiral ordered all ships to hide. Radio transmissions were reduced to nothing. Satellites were turned off. Earth went dark and silent. When Varadi scouts came to check on their future slaves, they would find nothing unusual. Just a quiet planet waiting to be conquered. The plan was risky. If the Varadi suspected anything, they would attack before humanity was ready. But the Admiral knew his enemy. Sethkar was arrogant. He believed humans were weak and stupid. He would not expect a trap. 2 years and 8 months after the attack on the Horizon's Edge, Varadi scout ships entered the outer solar system. They scanned the planets and moons, looking for defenses. They found almost nothing. A few old satellites, some primitive space stations. No weapons, no warships. The scouts sent their reports back to Zethkar. The human homeworld was undefended. The species had apparently accepted its fate. Conquest would be simple. Zethkar smiled when he received the news. He had been waiting for this moment. The Council of Overlords had given him 150 warships for the invasion. It was more than enough to crush any resistance. He did not know that humanity had spent 3 years hollowing out the moons of Jupiter. He did not know that every asteroid in the belt had been converted into a weapon. He did not know that 60 human warships were hiding in the shadows, waiting for his arrival. On Earth, Admiral Webb gathered his commanders for a final briefing. He looked at their faces and saw fear, determination, and hope mixed together. These men and women would lead humanity into the greatest battle of its history. Many of them would not survive. The Admiral spoke simply. He told them that the enemy was coming. He told them that the odds were against them. He told them that victory was not certain. But he also told them that humanity had faced impossible situations before and survived. They had survived ice ages. They had survived plagues. They had survived wars that should have destroyed them. They were still here. Commander Blake stood up when the Admiral finished. She said that her pilots were ready. They had trained for this moment. They were not afraid to die, but they planned to make the enemy die first. The room was silent for a moment. Then Ryan Kowalski raised his hand. He said that his engineers had worked miracles to build the fleet. They had done everything possible to give humanity a chance. Now it was up to the soldiers to finish the job. Dr. Torres spoke last. She said that her brother had died aboard the Horizon's Edge. He had been a good man with simple dreams. He had wanted to build a home on a new world, to raise a family under alien stars. The Verati had taken that dream away. Now it was time to take something from them. Admiral Webb nodded slowly. He gave the final order. All forces would move to their battle positions. The trap would be set. When the Verati arrived, humanity would be ready. In the darkness of space, the alien fleet moved closer. 150 warships, each one carrying weapons that could destroy cities. Zethkar stood on the bridge of his flagship and imagined the glory that awaited him. He would add another species to the Dominion. He would be remembered as a great conqueror. He had no idea that his fleet was flying toward its destruction. He had no idea that the weak, primitive humans had been preparing for 3 years. He had no idea that his arrogance had given them the time they needed. The battle for humanity's future was about to begin. The Verati Armada emerged from hyperspace near Jupiter's orbit. 150 warships appeared in perfect formation, their black hulls reflecting the distant light of the sun. High Commander Zethkar stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, and looked at the massive gas giant through the viewing screen. He felt satisfaction deep in his chest. Soon, another primitive species would bow before the might of his empire. His tactical officers scanned the area around them. They found nothing threatening. Just empty space, a few small moons, and the swirling storms of Jupiter itself. The human homeworld was still far away, waiting to be conquered. Then the moon called. It exploded with weapons fire. Hundreds of missiles launched from hidden bases buried deep within the moon's volcanic surface. Energy cannons that humans had built in secret fired beams of deadly light. The attack came from everywhere at once, catching the Verati completely by surprise. 18 alien ships died in the first 30 seconds. Their shields had not been raised. Their weapons had not been ready. They simply vanished in balls of fire and twisted metal. Zethkar screamed orders at his officers. He demanded to know what was happening. How could these primitive creatures have hidden weapons on Jupiter's moons? How could they have known where his fleet would arrive? He did not have time to find answers. From the asteroid belt and from the shadows of Jupiter's other moons, human warships emerged. 60 vessels moved together in tight formations, their weapons already firing. Admiral Webb's voice echoed across the human fleet. He told his people that this was the moment they had trained for. This was the moment they would show the universe what humanity could do. He told them to make the enemy pay for every life lost aboard the Horizon's Edge. Commander Samantha Blake led the Valkyrie squadrons directly into the heart of the Verati formation. Her fighters were small and fast, able to slip through gaps in the alien defenses. She had studied the enemy for 3 years. She knew their weaknesses. Lieutenant Derek Santos flew on her wing. He was 28 years old, a former racing pilot who had joined the military after the attack. He had lost his parents on a space station that the Verati destroyed during their initial scouting missions. He wanted revenge, and today he would get it that Derek dove his fighter toward a Verati cruiser. His weapons found the weak point in its shields, exactly where Dr. Torres had predicted. His missiles struck the hull and tore through the alien metal. The cruiser broke apart, its crew dying in the cold vacuum of space. Within 7 minutes, Derek had destroyed 5 enemy ships. He became the first human ace of the war. But there was no time to celebrate. The battle was far from over. The Verati recovered from their surprise quickly. Zethkar ordered his ships to form a defensive sphere, concentrating their firepower against the human attackers. His weapons were stronger than anything humanity had built. His shields could take tremendous punishment. He still had numbers on his side. The weapons platform on Callisto went silent as a concentrated barrage from 3 Verati dreadnoughts reduced it to rubble. The base had been commanded by Major Patricia Wells and her team of 300 defenders. They had known they could not survive against the full power of the alien fleet. They had fought anyway, buying precious time for their comrades. Captain Connor Hughes commanded the carrier Resolute, the largest ship in the human fleet. His job was to coordinate the fighter squadrons and provide support fire. When a Verati destroyer targeted his ship, he ordered his crew to brace for impact. The first hit destroyed the forward section of the bridge. Shrapnel tore through the air, killing officers at their stations. Connor felt blood running down his face from a wound on his scalp. His arm was broken, but he refused medical attention. He moved to a backup command station and continued directing the battle. The second hit took out the Resolute's main weapons array. The third hit breached the hull in multiple places. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut to contain the damage, trapping some crew members in sections without air. Connor ordered the survivors to continue fighting. He would not abandon his ship while his pilots still needed him. He coordinated attacks from the engine room, shouting orders through a damaged communication system. The battle raged for 19 hours. Neither side would give up. Every human ship fought until it could fight no more. Every pilot flew until their fuel ran out or their craft was destroyed. Every soldier gave everything they had. Admiral Webb watched the tactical display from his command center on Ganymede. He saw ships vanishing from both sides. He saw casualty numbers climbing higher and higher. He saw heroes rising and falling across the battlefield. At hour 16, Commander Blake led a desperate attack on a Verati dreadnought that was threatening to break through the human lines. Her squadron was down to 8 fighters from an original 24. She did not hesitate. She dove toward the enemy ship with weapons blazing. Her fighters swarmed the dreadnought like angry bees. They targeted its engines, its weapons, its shield generators. They died one by one, but they kept attacking. When Blake finally destroyed the dreadnought's main reactor, only she and 2 others remained. At hour 19, Zethkar made a decision that shocked his officers. He ordered the fleet to retreat. The Verati had lost 91 ships, including 3 of their massive dreadnoughts. More than half of his invasion force was gone. He could not afford to lose more. For the first time in 2,000 years, the Verati Dominion retreated from battle. The remaining alien ships turned and fled toward the outer system. Human forces were too damaged to pursue. Admiral Webb ordered his people to let them go. They had won. That was enough for now. On the Eternal Dominion, Zethkar stood alone on his damaged bridge. He stared at the tactical display showing the destruction of his fleet. He could not understand how this had happened. How could primitive creatures have defeated the mighty Vorati? He would have to report this failure to the Council of Overlords. They would not be pleased. But they would give him more ships. They would give him the Grand Fleet if necessary. These humans would pay for what they had done today. Back at Ganymede, Admiral Webb received the casualty reports. Humanity had lost 43 ships and more than 12,000 lives. The weapons platforms on 3 moons had been destroyed. The carrier Resolute was barely holding together, but they had one. Webb allowed himself a small smile. His trap had worked. The Vorati had walked right into it, blind in their arrogance. They had expected easy prey and found warriors instead. Commander Blake landed her damaged fighter and climbed out on shaking legs. Medical teams rushed to help the wounded. Engineers began the long work of repairing what could be saved. Chaplains moved among the survivors, offering comfort and prayer. There was no celebration that day. Too many friends had died. Too many good ships had been lost. But there was something more important than celebration. There was hope. Humanity had proven that the Vorati could be beaten. They had proven that the ancient empire was not invincible. They had proven that humans would not surrender, would not bow, would not break. Admiral Webb gathered his surviving commanders and told them the truth. The Vorati would return. They would bring a larger fleet next time. Humanity needed to strike first, to take the war to the enemy before they could recover. The Battle of Jupiter was over, but the war was just beginning. 6 months had passed since the Battle of Jupiter. Humanity had won that fight, but everyone knew the Vorati would return. Admiral Webb wanted to stay on the defensive, to build more ships and strengthen Earth's defenses. But the Coalition Council disagreed. They believed that waiting would give the enemy time to prepare an overwhelming force. Dr. Megan Torres had found something important. Deep in the captured data from Vorati ships, she had discovered information about their supply lines. A mining station in the Regulus system provided the special fuel that powered the entire Vorati fleet. Without that fuel, their ships could not travel through hyperspace. Without that fuel, they were trapped. The Council voted for Operation Thunderstrike. Humanity would send every combat-capable ship to attack the Regulus mining station. It was a desperate gamble. If they failed, Earth would be left defenseless. Commander Samantha Blake was promoted to captain and given command of the assault force. She had proven herself at Jupiter. She had led from the front and brought her people home. Now she would lead them into enemy territory. 47 ships gathered at the edge of the solar system. It was humanity's entire fleet, every warship that could still fly. If this mission failed, there would be nothing left to protect Earth. The journey to Regulus took 3 weeks through hyperspace. During that time, the crews prepared for what was coming. They trained, they planned, and they tried not to think about the odds against them. Chaplain Amy Hendricks walked through the ships, talking to soldiers who needed comfort. She was a small woman with kind eyes, but her voice carried strength. She told the troops that their cause was just. She told them that their sacrifice would mean something. She prayed with those who believed and simply listened to those who did not. Dr. Nathan Cole was aboard the fleet's medical ship. He had survived the destruction of the Horizon's Edge and spent years recovering on the frozen moon. Now he served as an advisor, briefing the Marines on Vorati biology. He showed them where the aliens were vulnerable. He taught them how to kill the creatures that had killed so many of his friends. Sergeant Brandon Cruz led a platoon of Marines who would storm the mining station. He was 31 years old, born in a small town in Texas. He had joined the military before the Vorati came, thinking he would spend his career guarding space stations and breaking up bar fights. Now he was about to lead his soldiers into the heart of enemy territory. His platoon trained constantly during the journey. They practiced close combat. They studied the layout of variety installations. They memorized every possible entry point and exit route. When the time came, they would be ready. The assault force dropped out of hyperspace directly above the Regulus mining station. The facility was massive, a sprawling complex of refineries and storage tanks floating in the light of a red giant star. Variety warships orbited around it. 23 vessels assigned to guard this crucial resource. Captain Blake gave the order to attack. Human ships spread out in a wide arc, weapons firing as they advanced. The Variety were caught off guard by the sudden appearance of enemies. So far from Earth, their communications became confused. As they tried to organize a defense, the first wave of human fighters swept through the enemy formation. Lieutenant Derek Santos, the ace from Jupiter, destroyed 3 ships in the opening minutes. His squadron punched a hole in the Variety defensive line, allowing the troop transports to reach the station. Sergeant Cruz and his Marines launched toward the mining station in assault shovels. Enemy fire filled the space around them. Cruz watched through a small window as the shuttle next to his exploded, killing everyone aboard. He forced himself to focus. He had a job to do. Their shuttle crashed through an airlock and into the station. The Marines poured out, weapons ready. Variety security forces were waiting for them. The aliens were tall and strong, with 4 arms and thick gray skin. Their weapons fired bolts of superheated plasma that could burn through human armor. They had been trained to fight, but they had never faced enemies like this. Cruz shot the first Variety in the head and kept moving. His Marines followed, covering each other as they advanced through the corridors. The fighting was brutal and close. There was no room for tactics, only violence. Corporal Nicole Peters took a plasma bolt to her shoulder. The pain was incredible, like fire eating through her flesh. But she did not stop. She switched her rifle to her other hand and kept firing. She killed 4 more Variety before a medic finally forced her to stop for treatment. The Marines fought through level after level of the station. Every corridor was a battle. Every room might contain enemies. They lost soldiers with every step, but they kept pushing forward. Lieutenant Heather Simmons led the demolition team. Their job was to reach the station's main reactor and destroy it. She was an explosives expert, a quiet woman who preferred bombs to conversation. She carried enough charges to level a city block. Her team reached the reactor after 2 hours of fighting. The chamber was enormous, filled with glowing machinery that pulsed with energy. This was the heart of the Variety fuel production. Destroy this, and the enemy fleet would be crippled for months. Heather placed her charges carefully. Each one had to be positioned exactly right to ensure complete destruction. Her hands were steady despite the sounds of combat echoing from nearby corridors. When she finished, she tried to activate the timer. Nothing happened. The detonator was damaged, probably from the rough landing or the fighting. The charges would not explode without a manual trigger. She looked at her team. They understood what this meant. Someone would have to stay behind to detonate the bombs. Someone would not be going home. Heather ordered her people to leave. They argued, but she pulled rank. This was her mission, her responsibility. She told them to run and not look back. Sergeant Cruz heard about the situation over the radio. He wanted to go back to find another way, but there was no time. Variety reinforcements were arriving. The humans had to evacuate now. Heather Simmons watched her team disappear down the corridor. She was alone now, surrounded by humming machinery and the sounds of distant battle. She thought about her family back on Earth, her mother, her sisters, the nephew she had never met. She hoped they would understand. She pressed the manual trigger. The explosion tore through the mining station like the fist of an angry god. Reactor cores overloaded, fuel tanks ignited, and the entire facility began to break apart. The blast was visible from orbit, A new star briefly appearing in the darkness of space. The surviving human forces fled the destruction. Captain Blake ordered a full retreat as secondary explosions rippled across the station. Variety ships tried to pursue, but the chaos made organized combat impossible. 17 human ships were lost in the battle for Regulus. Hundreds of soldiers and crew members died, including Lieutenant Heather Simmons. Her body was never recovered, but the mission was successful. The mining station was completely destroyed. Intelligence reports confirmed that the Variety fuel reserves would be disrupted for at least a year. Their grand invasion plans would have to wait. On the journey home, Captain Blake held a memorial service for the fallen. She read the names of every person who had died in the operation. It took almost an hour. When she finished, the crew observed a moment of silence that seemed to stretch forever. The news of the victory reached Earth before the fleet did. People celebrated in the streets, but the celebrations were mixed with grief. Everyone knew someone who had been lost. The price of freedom was being paid in blood. Admiral Webb met Captain Blake when her ship docked at the lunar base. He saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the weight of command that had settled on her shoulders. He told her that she had done well. She told him that too many good people had not come back. Meanwhile, on the Variety homeworld, High Commander Zethkar faced the Council of Overlords. They were furious about the destruction of the Regulus station. He had promised them easy conquest, and instead humanity had struck at the heart of their empire. Zethkar convinced them that this was only a temporary setback. He requested command of the Grand Fleet, 300 warships that had been held in reserve for centuries. With that force, he would crush humanity once and for all. The Council agreed. They gave him everything he asked for. The Grand Fleet would launch for Earth as soon as fuel reserves allowed. The final battle was coming, and both sides knew it would decide everything. 8 months after the destruction of the Regulus mining station, the Grand Fleet arrived at Earth. 300 Variety warships emerged from hyperspace, their black hulls blocking out the stars. It was the largest invasion force the Dominion had ever assembled. Enough firepower to destroy civilizations. High Commander Zethkar stood on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, which had been repaired and upgraded since the Battle of Jupiter. He looked at the blue planet hanging in the darkness and felt nothing but contempt. These primitive creatures had been lucky twice. They would not be lucky again. Admiral Marcus Webb watched the enemy fleet from his command center in orbit. His heart was heavy, but his voice was calm as he gave orders to his commanders. Humanity had 62 warships against 300. The odds were terrible, but retreat was not an option. If they lost here, there would be nowhere left to run. The human fleet formed a defensive sphere around Earth. Every ship, every weapons platform, every satellite was activated and ready. This was humanity's last stand. Captain Samantha Blake commanded the Vanguard from her new flagship, the Defiant. She had been given the best ship in the fleet and the best crew. Around her stood the survivors of 100 battles. Lieutenant Derek Santos, the ace pilot who had lost count of his kills. Sergeant Brandon Cruz, promoted to lieutenant and commanding the Marine contingent. Dr. Megan Torres, aboard to coordinate targeting solutions in real time. Zethkar broadcast his ultimatum across all frequencies. His harsh voice echoed through every human ship, every military base, every home on Earth that had a radio. He said that humanity had one final chance. Surrender now, and only half the species would be exterminated. The survivors would serve the Dominion forever. Resist and every man, woman, and child would die. There would be no mercy. Admiral Webb's response was broadcast across the same frequencies. His voice was steady and clear. He told Zethkar that humanity would never surrender. He told him that humans had faced extinction before and survived. He told him that the Variety would have to kill every last one of them to win this war. His final words were simple. Come and take us. The battle for Earth began at dawn, Pacific time. The Virati fleet advanced in a massive wave, their weapons filling space with deadly energy. Human ships returned fire, their railguns and missiles finding targets in the enemy formation. Within the first hour, humanity lost 20 ships. The Virati lost 40, but they could afford to lose more. Zethkar pressed the attack, pushing his fleet closer to the planet. He wanted to break through the human defenses and begin bombarding the surface. Admiral Webb ordered a fighting withdrawal toward the orbital defense platforms. These massive stations have been built over the past months, bristling with weapons. They were humanity's last line of defense. Every minute of delay gave the ground-based weapons more time to target the enemy. Captain Blake saw the situation clearly. The enemy was focusing on breaking through the center of the human line. If they succeeded, they would reach Earth itself. She could not let that happen. She led her squadron toward the Eternal Dominion. It was insane, suicidal, and necessary. If she could destroy Zethkar's flagship, the enemy fleet might lose coordination. It might be enough to turn the tide. Lieutenant Santos flew on her wing, just like he had at Jupiter. He knew this might be his last mission. He did not hesitate. He followed his captain into the heart of the enemy formation. Virati fighters swarmed around them. Energy weapons turned space into a deadly light show. Human pilots died by the dozens, their ships exploding into debris. But Blake kept pushing forward, her eyes fixed on the massive flagship ahead. Santos destroyed ship after ship, clearing a path for his captain. His fighter took hit after hit, but he refused to turn back. When a Virati destroyer moved to block Blake's approach, he made a decision in an instant. He rammed his fighter directly into the destroyer's engine section. The explosion destroyed both ships. Lieutenant Derek Santos, humanity's first ace, died instantly. His sacrifice cleared the final obstacle in Blake's path. She did not have time to mourn. She launched every missile she had at the Eternal Dominion's shield generators. The explosions tore through the flagship's defenses, leaving its hull exposed. At that moment, weapons fired from every continent on Earth. Railgun slugs traveling at incredible speeds shot up from the surface. They had been waiting for this chance, waiting for someone to bring down the flagship shields. The slugs struck the Eternal Dominion with the force of nuclear weapons. The impacts tore through the ship's hull, destroying compartments and killing crew members by the hundreds. The bridge took a direct hit. Zethkar died without understanding how he had lost. His last thought was denial. This could not be happening. Humans were weak. Humans were primitive. Humans could not have defeated him, but they had. With their flagship destroyed, the Virati formation fell apart. Some ships tried to flee. Others continued fighting alone, easier targets for coordinated human attacks. The grand fleet that had conquered a dozen civilizations was breaking. Admiral Webb gave the order to advance. Every surviving human ship pushed forward, weapons blazing. The orbital platforms fired continuously. Ground-based missiles launched by the thousands. By nightfall, the grand fleet was shattered. 163 Virati ships had been destroyed. 97 had fled into hyperspace. The rest drifted dead in orbit, their crews killed or surrendered. Humanity had won. Of the 62 ships that had defended Earth, only 19 survived. Admiral Webb was among the dead, killed when his command station took a direct hit in the final hours of battle. Dr. Torres survived, but had lost most of her team. Lieutenant Cruz was wounded but alive, pulled from his damaged shuttle by rescue crews. Captain Blake landed, her battered fighter on the deck of a carrier that was barely holding together. She climbed out and stood among the wreckage of victory. Medical teams rushed past her. Engineers shouted orders. Somewhere someone was crying. She thought about Derek Santos, who had given his life so she could complete her mission. She thought about all the pilots who had followed her into certain death. She thought about the 19 ships that remained from humanity's proud fleet. The war was not over. It would continue for 3 more years as humanity pushed into variety space. But the outcome was no longer in doubt. The Grand Fleet was gone. The Dominion was crippled. The 17 species that had been enslaved by the variety would soon be free. In the end, humanity did not just survive. Humanity conquered. On the memorial wall that was built in Geneva, the names of the fallen stretched for kilometers. Every soldier, every pilot, every engineer who had died defending Earth was remembered. Admiral Marcus Webb, Lieutenant Derek Santos, Lieutenant Heather Simmons, Captain Connor Hughes, and thousands more. Names that would be spoken with reverence for generations to come. Captain Blake became Admiral. Blake. She led the expeditionary force that liberated star system after star system. Dr. Torres continued her research, developing technologies that would let humanity spread across the galaxy. Lieutenant Cruz became an ambassador, building alliances with species that had suffered under variety rule. And on a small farm in Kansas, a boy named Kevin Torres grew up hearing stories about his uncle, who had died on a colony ship called the Horizon's Edge. His mother, the famous scientist, told him that Uncle Kevin's dream of reaching the stars had not died with him. It had just been delayed. The galaxy had underestimated humanity. They had seen a young species barely capable of leaving its home system. They had seen easy prey. They had not understood what humans were capable of when they were pushed to the edge. Humans had clawed their way up from nothing. They had survived ice ages, plagues, and wars that should have destroyed them. They had learned to work together when it mattered most. They had refused to give up, even when giving up was the only sensible choice. The variety had forgotten something important. They had ruled their corner of the galaxy for so long that they had forgotten what it meant to fight for survival. They had grown comfortable in their power. Humanity had never been comfortable. Humanity had always been fighting. And in the end, that made all the difference. The stars belonged to those who would not stop reaching for them. The variety had tried to take that dream away. They had failed. Humanity would never stop reaching. Humanity would never stop fighting. Humanity would never stop. That was the lesson the galaxy learned. That was the warning written in the ashes of the variety dominion. Never underestimate humanity.